Okay, welcome back. This is the final part of our introduction to Hamlet, and so let's get moving straight on. Let's consider the play as a tragedy. So what we have here is a definition of tragedy given to us by Aristotle. Important thing to remember, Aristotle was not a playwright. He's a philosopher and a critic. It's likely he's talking about Oedipus Rex when he's giving this definition, that tragedy is an imitation of an act that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude. The long and the short of this definition is that tragedy for Aristotle is a play about the downfall of a noble hero. The bigger the fall, the greater the magnitude of that fall, the greater the tragedy. And so when he talks about the proper purgation of these emotions, we're talking about this experience of catharsis in the audience. Some readings that I've done suggest that catharsis is about the purification and the cleansing of the tragic hero. Most definitions I read of catharsis talk about that cleansing and purgation in the audience. So here are a couple of the key ideas here. Hamartia is the tragic flaw. In Greek tragedy, we see hamartia often being about a lack of knowledge. Oedipus not knowing that his wife is in fact his mother, not knowing that he killed his own father. I've mentioned catharsis already, and the key thing to remember here is that it's about a downfall of a noble. That is the convention of tragedy that would then be subverted and adapted in the late 19th and into the 20th century. Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman has a tragic hero who's an everyman, a common person, and that challenges the conventions of tragedy. And so here are the key names in Greek tragedy. We have Sophocles, who wrote Oedipus and Antigone. We have Euripides, who wrote Medea, and Aeschylus, who wrote the Orestia. Now, warning, Aristotle and Greek playwrights did not directly influence the tragedies of medieval or Elizabethan England. That credit goes to the Roman writer Seneca, whose tragedies of blood borrowed subjects from the Greeks. And it's through Seneca that principles of Greek tragedy were transmitted to the Elizabethans, and they're characterized by revenge, ghosts, mutilation, carnage. Titus Andronicus is a really great example of that. Macbeth as a tragedy of blood, so much so that the Japanese film version would be called Throne of Blood. Seneca's violence occurred offstage and was reported. Senecan tragedy would often just have a person speaking the action rather than performing it. Elizabethan audiences had an appetite for violence and horror and urged the action to take place on stage. Now, while comedies encourage us to laugh at the foibles of humanity, tragedies focus us on the darker side of human nature. It was the artistic pinnacle of Elizabethan theatre. So when we critique them, we're not looking just at the action, but the way the play is adorned by language. And the ideas that emerge remain relevant today because many of them are universal. However, the conclusions we arrive at change because the cultural baggage we bring to the play changes. In other words, there are many readings to be applied to Hamlet. Now, how to read a play such as Hamlet is hotly contested and it's divisive in academic circles. The new critics would tell us ignore the context, ignore the biography of Shakespeare. They were responding to the Romantic criticism of the 1800s, which was obsessed with looking at Shakespeare's biography, getting the order of his plays right, to look through his biography to say what the meaning of the text was. A Romantic reading in that period would look at Shakespeare's son Hamlet dying in 1596, looking at the correlation to the name Hamlet and saying, well, this must be about his own son dying. We still have an obsession with that today. There are so many books today about biography, particularly of Shakespeare. But for the new critics, they would reject all that. Now, they'd say meaning can only be found in the play itself and not in an analysis of its sources, context, and authorial biography. It's about the interactions and ambiguities that arise in the language of the play. Now, I've highlighted in this box here political critics. Be wary of the term. I mean, political criticism is a bit of a nothing term. I use that as an umbrella term for your Marxist criticism, your post-colonial criticism, your feminist criticism. Now, John Dollymore, who's a cultural materialist, might argue that traditional reading practices that stay within the text serve the interests of the elite, dominant classes, by deflecting attention from social and economic factors contributing to the text. So traditional readings of tragedy continue to reflect a heightened sense that to be noble is to be more important. That they would reject the idea that reading tragedy makes an audience better people. And so they would look underneath it and look at the marginalised groups in the play. Feminist critics would look at Ophelia and Gertrude and focus on how they're negotiating their roles in a patriarchal world. Now, when we're wrestling with Hamlet, by the end of this unit, you're going to be able to identify a key scene from each act. You're going to be able to discuss the scene in terms of its manipulation of the conventions of drama. You're going to be able to discuss the scene in terms of the key themes and questions it raises, and discuss it in terms of how its meaning is informed by its context. This is dry because I'm taking it straight out of our literature syllabus, but that's ultimately what we're going to do. We're serving two masters here. One, to prepare you to be able to tackle this play in an academic context at school, and the other, to get you to take something valuable from your schooling and see this play and appreciate it moving forward. And hopefully when you graduate school, you'll still keep going to see Shakespeare plays. Well, thank you for your time, and hopefully you get a lot out of that. Good luck.